Versailles. Everyone knows it for its glory and power, but few know that right beneath those magnificent arches lies a world with a terrible smell. In this podcast episode, we will uncover the least pleasant truth about the legendary palace, a place where chamber pots are everywhere, human waste leaks under the marble floors, and luxurious perfumes desperately fight against what Versailles never dares to mention waste. This is not a story of glory, but a journey through 10 layers of stench that created one of the most powerful yet filthiest places in European history. Louis XIV, who called himself Le Roi Soleil, the radiant Sun King of France, woke up every morning not to look in the mirror or at his throne, but to begin a ritual of wiping himself. Yes, wiping. No baths, no showers, no soap, just a soft cloth and a flask of strong liquor, and a few swipes for freshness. The king, admired across Europe, ruled for more than 70 years but bathed only twice, a legendary number, a record worth noting in the chronicles of body odour. But hold on, don't be shocked yet. For Louis, water wasn't for bathing. Water was for watering flowers, cleanliness. That's what alcohol and perfume were for. Every morning, servants drew the curtains, opened the windows to let in light, and began the daily show, soaking a cloth in alcohol and gently rubbing it on his chest, neck and underarms, then spraying perfume for a pleasant scent, finishing with a soft tap as if dusting a baked apple. Every wipe was a rebirth in the scent of alcohol and the illusion of hygiene. And that's not all. The king changed his shirt 4 to 5 times a day, not because he was a fashion enthusiast, but because he sweat like ordinary people and didn't want anyone to know. Each shirt was a mask, a form of escape from the real smell. White as snow, fragrant as a lie. That was enough for Versailles. You ask if the courtiers were different? Not at all. They also sprayed perfume from knees to hairline. They sprayed while eating, sleeping, even going to the bathroom, always carrying it with them. Versailles lacked nothing but water. Perfume was oxygen. Anyone without scent was deemed classless. And if you ever wondered why France is the homeland of the most expensive perfumes in the world, this is where every bottle of fragrance was born from fear of smelling bad and an obsession with not bathing. Not from a passion for scent, but because they couldn't stand themselves without another layer of smell to cover it. The Versailles ladies also had their own performance. Their dresses flared in many layers, covering from waist to ankle, and beneath those brocades a strong odour often silently showed up. Not their fault. The entire palace had no concept of proper personal hygiene. No one washed their private parts with water. Many had never soaked beyond their ankles all winter. So the hand fans you see in old paintings were not just props for flirting. They were emergency tools. Servants had to stand next to noble women fanning constantly to repel smells, chase flies, and sometimes turn away when the wind changed direction. Versailles never lacked the scent of flowers, but they were not flowers from the garden. Most weddings in Europe at that time were held in June, because May was the national bathing season once a year. People bathed together in a big tub in order from the host down to the children. Newborns were bathed last when the water was murky enough to share private stories. By June, everyone was still comfortable enough to take wedding photos and not faint in the church. Brides often carried bouquets not just for beauty, but to save the people nearby. From there, the tradition of the bridal bouquet was born, a bunch of flowers that separates history from reality. At Versailles, cleanliness was a performance. Every wiping cloth was a prop. Every bottle of perfume was makeup, and when the entire court acted out the play clean without water, the audience could only sit there and be hit right in the face. Who says history doesn't have a smell? You just haven't smelled it in the right place. Every marble floor tile could tell a story. But it's not a romantic story between ladies and counts, but a story about poop. Yes, the kind of story you don't see in oil paintings nor hear in court music, but that is present everywhere. Staircases, hallways, fireplace corners, and even right behind gilded doors. The Louvre Palace in Paris, once the royal headquarters before Louis XIV's time, was not much better. A 1645 report recorded, "On the grand staircases behind doors and almost everywhere, people saw piles of feces and smelled thousands of unbearable foul odours caused by the call of nature that everyone answered every day." Versailles was just a more magnificent and evenly smelly extension of that tradition. In that context, Louis XIV saw no surprise in greeting guests on his chaise d'affaires. There were more than 200 chaise d'affaires in the palace. Not all belonged to the king, but they were so common they became part of the interior landscape. A special chair with a soft cushion, sturdy armrests, and a hollow bottom for working, while sitting in both the figurative and literal sense. Courtiers stood nearby, pinching their noses, mentally bowing out of habit. Witnessing the king discussing taxes while straining with a red face was not an insult, but an honour. At Versailles, the smell of the throne mixed with the smell of people was normal. And don't think this stopped at Louis. Nobles also had personal commodes. The higher the rank, the more one was allowed to handle business in a private space, sometimes with velvet curtains and fragrances to mask the odour. Versailles was a place where even using the bathroom had ranks. From simple ceramic chamber pots for servants to gold-inlaid chaise d'affaires for the upper class. It was not a matter of need, it was a matter of status. Versailles did not hide poop. Versailles lived with it. Every step echoing on the marble floor might quietly slide over a thin, damp streak of aftermath. Not rainwater, not candle wax, just a part of the palace, a part of the ritual, a part of the truth not found in paintings. The most magnificent palace in Europe didn't just stink. Because of the past, it preserved that smell in every tile joint, every dark corner. And once the king considered the bathroom a meeting room, you should also learn to salute properly before a lidded chamber pot. That is Versailles. That is glory mixed with ammonia. This place is not only famous for mirrored ceilings and flower gardens, it is also famous for windows. But not because of beautiful light shining through, but because it was where royal residents nonchalantly solved an urgent problem dumping chamber pots. The chamber pot, a familiar porcelain pot, was a loyal companion to all Versailles residents from the king to the guards. But after emptying the soul, no one wanted to keep it in the room for more than a few minutes. And because the palace didn't have a proper sewage system, no vacuum trucks, and certainly no urban sanitation teams, the simplest solution was opening the window. From the first to the third floor, from the queen's bedroom to the maid's hallway, every Versailles window witnessed skillful hand flicks, sending waste flying into the air, then landing somewhere stairs, flower beds, or visiting guests' heads if they weren't on time. Sometimes a gentle breeze was enough to redirect the sparkling drops of Versailles' output to reappear, when no one wanted them. At that time, anyone crossing the palace courtyard knew the golden rule. Don't walk close to the walls, don't look up, and it's best to wear a wide-brimmed hat. Smart people learned to guess which window was slightly open, which curtain just fluttered softly to avoid a surprise strike from above, not with a sword but with urine. Unfortunately, not everyone escaped in time. According to oral anecdotes, once Marie Antoinette had just stepped out of her room and got a full palace greeting right on her dress's shoulder. Although there are no clear documents confirming this in a place where the exhaust was air, and the rule was to dump wherever convenient, then that's not hard to happen. And no throwing chamber pots out the window is not an isolated habit. It's a culture. Versailles saw nothing wrong with it. Servants sometimes just carried chamber pots a few steps, then stopped, threw open the magnificent Baroque glass doors and sent the contents down into the Versailles gardens where fragrant flowers bloomed amid premium organic matter. The residents here lived in two layers of the world. The upper layer was light cloaks, fine fabrics. The lower layer was falling excrement, pooled urine, and a bit of luck every time you stepped outside. Everyone knew, no one said it aloud. The marble floors of Versailles were for dancing the minuet and for avoiding unexpected black puddles if you were sharp enough not to slip into a new chapter of court history. The windows of Versailles were not for letting in the breeze. They were the only emergency exits for thousands of litres of waste each week. In a place where every nook was a stage, even the chamber pot had its own performance. And when you hear the faint plink overhead on a quiet afternoon, don't look up. Versailles is speaking, literally. If anyone ever told you Versailles was a flawless palace, ask what part they meant. Because there was one thing always present, always silent, always existing on every floor and stair of the palace urine. Latrines' early public toilets did exist in Versailles, but their numbers did not anywhere near match the court population. With thousands of residents living, working, and watching each other day and night in the palace, those tiny rooms called conveniences were like the village. Well, everyone needed them, but only a few managed to queue. And you know it, the Versailles schedule didn't include waiting long to go to the toilet. The result was that hallways, staircases, corners, even fireplaces became instant alternatives. People took care of business quickly behind a half-open door, or right in the middle of the path if no noble was nearby. Especially at night, when Versailles fell asleep, the ammonia smell quietly returned as the real queen of the palace. In 1702, Princess Elizabeth Charlotte of the Palatinate, a German married into the French royal family, and completely candid, wrote about this familiar scene in a letter. Home. The people standing in the corridor outside my room urinate in every corner. It's impossible to leave the room without encountering someone in the act. No euphemisms, no metaphors, a direct report vivid with smell. And don't think this was just the servants' business. Many nobles, both men and women, left traces in the castle. Convenience won over honour. The whole palace was a smell map, and anyone who stayed long enough at Versailles naturally developed the ability to navigate by scent, to the point that Louis XIV finally had to order the servants to clean the waste at least once a week. Yes, once a week. That means if you visit Versailles on a Thursday, you're stepping on 20 square metres of tiled floor that might hold more stories than the Royal Library archives. The stench spread from the hallways to the gardens, from staircases into the main hall, from bedrooms to the chapel. Those who lived there said that some places smelled so strongly it was impossible to speak. Everyone covered their noses, bowed their heads, pretending to focus on the ceiling patterns, while the real scent blossomed from beneath their feet. Imagine a Versailles ball where violins played inside a gold-gilded room, shimmering lace dresses twirling in candlelight. And right by the wall, not far from the harp, was a silent stain of a convenient story. That's Versailles. Everything was magnificent until you looked down at the floor. Here, perfume was never enough to overcome the real smell. And the hallways didn't just lead to the throne. They marked every very human step of the royal family. If Versailles was the stage of 17th century Europe, then the unnamed supporting characters were actually the ones dominating backstage cats. Lots of cats. Pet cats, stray cats, lost noble cats. Cats breed right behind the velvet curtains. Cats urinate on the legs of Louis chairs. And then there are cat corpses. When the palace expanded, mice appeared like uninvited guests. And the cats, of course, were summoned as the night hunting squad. At first they were pampered. Some noble ladies even raised 5 or 6 cats, fed them from silver plates, and called them by Italian names. But Versailles had its own laws of hierarchy and fallout. No one had time to clean cat poop, and the cats naturally didn't need anyone's permission when they needed to relieve themselves. They pooped all over the tiled floor, climbed onto the chapel altar to sleep, clambered onto the guards' beds, then left some gifts in the morning under the mattresses. From the garden to the gallery, Versailles became a living map of cat scat, and the problem became more serious when cat corpses began to appear. Avenue Saint-Cloud, the road leading out of the palace, was once described as covered with stagnant water and dead cats. Cat corpses were thrown out without anyone bothering to bury them. When the sun came up, the bodies swelled. When it rained, the corpses sank into the mud. Distinguished visitors strolling by might step into something soft and strange, then just dared to look straight ahead to avoid being visually disturbed again. Sometimes cats were still alive but chose the wrong places to sleep. A legend was told that once Louis XIV was contemplating life on a chaise d'affaires, when a cat jumped out from inside the chair and scratched the king's thigh. A slight scratch, a big anger. No one dared to laugh, but the whole palace heard that fateful meow. And you know, in a space where perfume was used to mask human odours, the smell of cats became the ultimate betrayer. It didn't get covered up. It crept into layers of brocade, soaked into corners of walls, and blended into the Versailles scent symphony in its own way. Every scratch, every soft growl in the dark was a reminder that the royal palace had no absolutely clean zones, only places cats hadn't marked yet. Yet no one drove the cats away, because no one wanted the mice to come back. Between stepping into cat poop or letting rodents gnaw on the queen's skirts, Versailles chose the less noisy solution, and the cats thus became official residents. No registration, no taxes, just coming in and leaving a few marks. Versailles may shine under the sunlight, but in the dark where velvet curtains hang down and the painting of the Virgin quietly gazes sideways, cats are still there, walking, tiptoeing over the cold tiles, leaving traces no one wants to light a candle to inspect. And that is the truth about Europe's most magnificent palace. Not just waltz music, lace dresses and mirrored ceilings, but also the rustling scratches at midnight, a pungent smell around the baseboards, and sometimes a cat corpse lying across the path. Versailles is famous for 3-day-long banquets, wine poured to the brim of glasses and dishes with names sounding like ancient poetry. But hidden beneath thick sauces and floral decorations, there was a component few mentioned: parasites. King Louis XIV was once noted to have bid farewell to a nearly 6-inch-long tapeworm from his body. That was no tall tale. It was a chronicle of a belly containing everything Versailles wanted to hide, and he wasn't the only one with companions inside their guts. It all started in the kitchen. During one flood of sewer rats, Marie Antoinette's entire kitchen flooded with wastewater. The dishes being prepared were gently pushed aside. The head chef watched a marinated meat piece fall into a puddle on the floor, then picked it up as if he had just dropped a gem. Everyone ate without knowing, nor did they want to know. As long as there was a little herb aroma, a little mushroom sauce, and most importantly enough wine to blur the tongue. In that world, the intestines became the last frontier where worms from the last meal were still waiting for the next. Bathing wasn't much better. In peasant families at that time, bathing happened once each season, using a large tub filled with warm water. Then the whole family bathed in order of honour. The householder bathed first, babies bathed last. By their turn, the water was no longer water. It was a relic of daily life, a mixture strong enough to cause infection just from a yawn. No wonder that many children who survived winter then were considered an achievement. And when you think things have hit rock bottom, Versailles still has a way to go further. Many roofs back then had no lining, just bare wooden beams where cockroaches, rats, cats, and sometimes even dogs lived as naturally as plants. Raining. An animal could fall straight onto the dining table. You thought you were invited to have bean soup num. That was the shock twist between appetizer and main dish. That's Versailles. Meals always had an element of surprise. Even the eating utensils were not safe, or nobles used tin plates to show their status. But when serving tomatoes, a new dish from America, the acid from the tomato fruit oxidized the tin. Result, diners were severely poisoned with cases, dying on the spot. The blame fell on the tomato. Tomatoes were banned from the royal court for many years just because no one thought to blame the plate. Versailles was a grand theatre. On stage were balls and feasts. Behind the wings were stomach aches vomiting and tapeworms pole dancing inside intestines. They ate unwashed dishes, drank from cups not rinsed, and sometimes stopped eating not because they were full, but because lice in the wig started crawling down the neck. And even though the guts were screaming, Versailles kept dancing. Because more important than health was image. Everyone knew that today's soup tasted a bit strange, but no one dared to ask why. At Versailles, the head was not only a place to wear a crown, it was the stage of a complicated fashion. The nobler the higher the head, the bigger the hair, and the bigger the hair, the more things lived inside that you never wanted to know the names of. In the 17th century, French nobles, especially men, began shaving their heads to wear wigs. Real hair was where lice hid, and wigs were where lice settled, reproduced, opened shops and held parties. They liked that place. Low light, rare washing, lots of perfume, and many chances to climb. Each wig was usually made from human hair, horsehair or goat hair depending on the budget and willingness to splurge. Braided, sprayed, powdered and sprayed again. Every day out, Versailles gentlemen carried a mini biological nest. Scent covered the outside, warmth nourished inside. Lice lived well, no ticket needed. Women seldom shaved like men, but that didn't mean they escaped. Noble women liked to puff up their real hair, attach more wigs, then build huge structures shaped like ships' paintings or models of flower gardens on top of their heads. Each hairstyle was a meticulous architectural work, also a multi-level residential area for all kinds of migrating insects. On some hot summer days, the hair powder began to clump. The sweat smell from unwashed scalps for weeks seeped through each goat hair, mixing with lavender scent and sulphur powder to prevent fire. Yes, prevent fire. Because some nobles almost became living torches when bowing too close to a candle and the hair caught fire. Versailles was a place where fashion could kill you in silence and shimmering light. And on weekends, servants were ordered to boil the wigs. Boiling water killed the lice. If the hair got tangled, it was combed out with an ivory comb. If it smelled, it was soaked in rose essential oil. But that was only a temporary solution. The real smell would come back. And the lice, of course, always found their way home. No one dared to speak out. Because it was the era of masks. Versailles used fabric perfume and rituals to hide everything. Hair was part of that script. Every time you bowed your head in greeting, you pulled along a whole silent community of companions. Everyone knew, but everyone ignored it, because in the court where perfume was the state religion, having lice on your head was less shameful than letting others smell it. And as usual, the problem wasn't dirtiness itself, but the wrong kind of dirtiness. That was Versailles. From scalp to heel, everything was decorated to deceive the senses. But lice were not easily fooled. They lived, crawled and chuckled silently in 1,000-livre wigs, waiting for the next moment to itch at the perfect time. In a crowded hall, candlelight shimmering, baroque music playing softly, you might not hear the lice, but they were still there. And maybe they were the only thing truly close in all of Versailles. Versailles, in the eyes of 17th century Europe, was the perfect embodiment of power. and the pinnacle of the art of living. But if you look a little deeper, walk past the gilded halls, turn into the small courtyards behind, and closely smell the morning air, you will discover this Versailles was also a part-time livestock pen. This is not an exaggeration. Horses, cows, goats, and several other kinds of livestock were actually kept right within the palace grounds. They served very Versailles-specific needs horses to pull carriages, cows to provide fresh milk for the queen goats, to just be there for completeness. Each species had a legitimate reason to be present, but none ever came with someone to clean up their droppings. Imagine a horse panting as it pulls Louis for an afternoon stroll, stopping in the marble-tiled hallway, lifting its tail and leaving a few dark brown characters on French culture's floor. Servants would occasionally wipe it off, or maybe not, because Versailles had too many things to clean, and horse manure by Versailles standards was still not a priority issue. The livestock were not confined to their stables. Sometimes they were led through the garden, sometimes appeared in the inner courtyard, and even tied temporarily in the east corridor to wait for their next task. While waiting, they ate, slept, and excreted like any living creature. The only difference was their droppings fell on marble imported from Italy. There is a story that a foreign visitor on their first visit to Versailles almost slipped when entering the Grand Hall. Not because the floor was wet, but because a patch of cow dung was quietly existing between four massive Corinthian columns. No one explained it. No one was surprised. Everyone just kept walking as if they were crossing a spring meadow, a meadow wearing a lace skirt. Cows were sometimes kept right behind the kitchen for convenient early milking. Their droppings not yet removed accumulated at the base of the walls. The wind blew through, carrying the scent of the countryside. The people in the palace became so used to the smell that they no longer reacted. Anyone who lived in Versailles understood if you feel something's soft under your feet, look down before complaining. Versailles was a palace of music and poetry, but at the same time it was a place where the neighing of horses and the sound of droppings falling echoed alongside the violin. No one dared to call it a farm. But if you arrived at the right time, looked in the right direction, and breathed the right way, you would see Versailles lacked nothing, except white picket fences and farmers' signs. Here the art of living and the survival instincts of animals intertwined in noble silence. Every stain was convincingly natural, every pile of manure regarded as an accident. And every knowledgeable guest learned to step lightly, speak softly, and never believe that Versailles smelled only of flowers. In the royal game, even dung had to appear in the right place at the right time, and if possible, with great class. At Versailles, cleanliness did not come from soap, nor from water, it came from blood, and from the old-fashioned belief that disease, dirt, and internal imbalance could all be released if you knew how to draw the right amount of blood at the right time with sufficient solemnity. Leeching blood sucking by leeches and phlebotomy, cutting veins to let blood flow were two of the most popular medical services during Louis XIV's time. Not only for the sick, but also for the healthy. The higher the rank, the more often they bled, because they believed it was the way to keep the body pure, the mind sharp, and to avoid smelling bad from the inside. Louis XIV was a regular patient of these bloodletting sessions. His royal physician scheduled him tightly this month, the left arm next month, the right leg mid-year, a tongue scrape for good measure. Some days he was pricked 3 or 4 times, not because he was ill, but because he needed to detox. Versailles was not only filthy on the outside, it was obsessed with the invisible things in the blood. If you imagine bloodletting back then as a peaceful scene with scented candles and clean cloths, allow me to shatter that illusion. They used thin knives, cut a small slit, blood spurted out, absorbed by the linen cloth or caught in a porcelain bowl. Leeches were specially bred, carefully fed and attached to the body like medical jewellery. There were leeches as big as pinky fingers. Some leeched until they swelled like grapes, and when pulled out, that soft pop sound was what Versailles saw as a sign of revival. Medical theory at the time was based on the 4 humours: blood yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Whichever was in excess had to be drained. The thing was in a humid climate, eating fatty foods and lacking clean water. The thing most excessive wasn't recorded in books. But letting blood was simpler than finding the source of bacteria, and more importantly, it looked serious. A king bleeding before his ministers showed he was proactively controlling his health. A noble cutting their hand in their bedroom was doing what society needed. And the consequences: some felt dizzy, some got infections, some bled, so much they fainted in the hall. But Versailles was experienced in handling fainting spells. They just sprayed a bit of perfume on the face and let them lie on the hard sofa in an empty room. And even though outside smelled like sewers and inside was full of worms and parasites, the idea of cleansing the body through blood made the whole court feel progressive. They didn't wash their hair, didn't wash their hands, didn't clean the kitchen. But they drained blood, regularly, proudly, as if every drop of blood drawn was a bit of dirt honourably sent away. At Versailles, the smell didn't only come from trash animals or chamber pots. It came from the very belief that cleanliness was something that could be cut out. And in such a world, the scalpel became a wipe, blood became hand sanitizer, and Versailles kept glowing amid the century's stench. After nearly 3/4 of a century living in glory and ammonia smells, finally someone in the royal family exclaimed, "How can we stand this?" That person was Louis XV, the great-grandson of Louis XIV. And even though he didn't shine like the Sun King, he at least had a better nose than his ancestors. Louis XV grew up surrounded by an abundance of perfume and floors that never fully dried. He sat on the throne when stories of chamber pots flying out the window had become vivid legends. Maybe he once stepped into a puddle or was caught by an unexpected whiff. Whatever the case, by 1738 he did something no one had thought of before installing the first flush toilet at Versailles. Yes, a flush toilet. Quiet revolution. Battle between running water and centuries of chamber pot noise. This toilet was installed in Louis XV's private room, not the public areas, but enough to start a movement. A sign that the palace was beginning to recognise its own odour. Along with that, he expanded the sewage system, moving cesspits away from the centre, preventing waste from backing up into bedrooms or kitchens. Some areas reserved for high nobles started having separate commodes with proper wooden doors and, if lucky, scented candles. Versailles entered an era when waste was better hidden, dumped in the right places and smelled less. Madame de Pompadour, Louis XV's famous mistress, also had her own toilet. No more chamber pots hidden in drawers. No more rushing to open windows late at night. Personal matters began to have private space, and the palace started to learn to respect itself. But don't think everything changed magically. The smell didn't vanish immediately. Lice didn't retreat because of a flush handle, and cats still slept behind curtains, leaving soft messages under silk slippers. Versailles didn't become a hygiene paradise after one toilet, but at least it showed that people began to feel bothered, and that was progress. Louis XV's hygiene reforms didn't make history books. They didn't resound like wars weren't as splendid as banquets, nor were they engraved on mirror ceilings. But for Versailles, which once hid foul odours under lace skirts, facing the chamber pot and saying, "We need to do something," was as brave as ruling a kingdom. And so the history of Versailles turned a new page. No longer entirely dependent on perfume to survive, no longer needing to pray every time they walked through a damp hallway. No longer do we have to guess whether what just fell from the third-floor window was rainwater or royal inheritance. Versailles started to drain water. And that's enough for us to know, finally, after so many years living between sparkle and stench, the French monarchy learned one thing: power can rule, but smell always wins if not treated properly. Thank you for joining us through this unpleasant story about the history of France. Don't forget to take a deep breath, light some scented candles if you still haven't fully escaped this nightmare, and see you in the next episode.